Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the worn leather sandals of someone living through the most epic, everything is fine moment in human history. Picture this. You're waking up in Rome on what will become known as the last day of the Western Roman Empire, September 4th, 476 AD. And honestly, you probably won't survive the next decade because, spoiler alert, civilization, as you know it, is about to faceplant harder than a drunk gladiator. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing our little global community of history nerds. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir awake as the first pale fingers of dawn creep through the gaps in your wooden shutters. The air carries that peculiar mixture of wood smoke, human waste, and the lingering incense from last night's prayers, a cocktail that's become Rome's signature scent over the past few chaotic decades. Your straw mattress crackles beneath you as you shift, and somewhere in the distance, you can hear the familiar sound of cartwheels grinding against stone, though fewer than in years past. The morning light reveals the cracks in your apartment's plaster walls, cracks that seem to grow wider each month, much like the fissures running through the empire itself. You're living in one of Rome's infamous insulae, those towering apartment blocks that house the city's million-plus residents. Historians still argue whether these buildings were architectural marvels or death traps, but considering yours sways slightly in strong winds, you're leaning toward the latter. As you pull on your woolen tunic, the same one you've been wearing for 3 days because, let's be honest, laundry is a luxury when you're not sure where your next meal is coming from. You catch the scent of bread baking from the bakery below. The baker, old Marcus, somehow still manages to produce his daily loaves, despite the fact that grain shipments from Egypt have become as reliable as a weather forecast. It's one of those small miracles that keeps Roman life stumbling forward, even as the empire's death rattle grows louder. You step carefully across the uneven floorboards, avoiding the loose plank that nearly sent you tumbling into the apartment below last week. Through your window, you can see the 7 hills of Rome emerging from the morning mist, their slopes dotted with the marble monuments and temples that once proclaimed this city's dominion over the known world. The Colosseum's massive bulk looms in the distance, though its last gladiatorial games ended decades ago these days. It's more likely to host a Christian sermon than a lion feeding. The irony isn't lost on you that you're witnessing the end of an empire that once boasted it would last forever. Rome's poets used to write about the eternal city, and honestly, that confidence was probably justified when Roman legions were conquering everything from Britain to Mesopotamia. But empires, like people, have a way of aging when you're not paying attention. What started as a few wrinkles around the edges, some barbarian raids here, a rebellious province there, has become full-blown institutional collapse. Your neighbors are already stirring. Through the thin walls, you can hear the Gaius family's infant crying, probably hungry again. food shortages have become as common as sunrise, and mothers throughout the city are making impossible choices about feeding their children. The sound mingles with the morning prayers of the Christian widow next door. She's been praying for the empire's salvation for 30 years now, and you have to admire her optimism, even if her gods seem to have other plans. As you splash cold water on your face from the clay basin beside your bed, you catch a glimpse of your reflection in the polished bronze mirror hanging on the wall. You look older than your years, which isn't surprising considering the stress of living through civilization's slow-motion collapse. Your friends joke that watching an empire die is like watching paint dry, except the paint is on fire and the building is falling down around you. The morning ritual of getting dressed takes on an almost sacred quality in these uncertain times. Each day that you wake up in a functioning city with bread available and aqueducts still flowing feels like a small victory against the chaos pressing in from all sides. You're living in one of history's great transition moments, though you won't fully understand its significance until historians centuries later start calling it the fall of Rome, as if a 1,000-year empire could simply topple over like a drunk senator. Outside your window, Rome awakens to another day of determined normalcy in the face of impending doom, and you're about to step into streets that have witnessed more history than any other patch of earth on the planet. You make your way through the winding streets toward the Palatine Hill, where the imperial palace still maintains its facade of power, though that facade is wearing thinner than a senator's promises. The morning sun catches the marble columns and bronze statues that line the processional way, creating an almost dreamlike quality that makes you forget, for just a moment, that you're walking through the death throes of an empire. The palace guards still stand at their posts, though their equipment tells a story of decline. Their bronze armor is patched with iron, their shields bear the dents of countless repairs, and their spears are more functional than ceremonial. These aren't the proud Praetorian guards of old. Those elite units were disbanded generations ago after one too many emperor-murdering incidents. Today's palace security consists mainly of Germanic mercenaries who probably couldn't spell Rome in Latin, but they're loyal enough as long as the pay arrives on time. Inside the palace, you witness one of history's most pathetic spectacles, the morning routine of Romulus Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor. He's barely 16 years old, which would be impressive if he actually had any power. But calling him an emperor is like calling a puppet a person. The kid's got the imperial purple toga and the fancy diadem, but the real power rests with his barbarian general, Odocer, who's been running the show for months now. You watch as young Romulus practices his morning recitations, stumbling over the same Latin phrases that once commanded legions from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. His tutors still insist on teaching him the traditional imperial protocols, how to receive foreign ambassadors, how to address the Senate, how to conduct religious ceremonies. But it's like teaching someone to captain a ship that's already underwater. The irony is delicious. The last Roman emperor is named after Rome's legendary founder, as if history itself is having a laugh at the empire's expense. The palace breakfast is a study in diminished expectations, where previous emperors dined on delicacies imported from across the empire: peacock tongues from Gaul, spiced wine from Spain, exotic fruits from Africa. Romulus makes do with local bread, cheese, and whatever vegetables the palace gardens can produce. Historians still argue whether this simplicity represents a return to Roman republican virtues or just plain old poverty. But given the state of the imperial treasury, you're betting on the latter. Most telling moment comes when a messenger arrives with dispatches from the provinces. The young emperor listens as his advisors explain that several more regions have declared independence, that tax revenues have dropped to levels not seen since the Republic, and that the army's loyalty is increasingly questionable. Romulus nods solemnly, as if he's absorbing crucial information that will guide his decision-making. But you can see in his eyes that he understands his irrelevance. What's fascinating is how everyone around the emperor continues the charade. Courtiers still bow when he enters a room. Officials still present him with documents to sign, and his food taster still samples his meals. Though honestly, if someone wanted to poison the emperor at this point, they'd probably be doing him a favor. The machinery of imperial ceremony grinds on, even as the empire itself crumbles around it. You overhear a conversation between two palace officials discussing the emperor's future. One suggests sending him to live with relatives in the countryside, away from the political turmoil. The other argues that maintaining the imperial presence is crucial for legitimacy, even if that presence is more symbolic than substantial. It's like watching people rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic, except the Titanic had better engineering and more competent leadership. The morning audience session provides the day's entertainment. A handful of petitioners still come to seek imperial justice, though their numbers have dwindled to a trickle. Most people have figured out that real power lies elsewhere, with the barbarian generals, the local strongmen, or the increasingly influential Christian bishops. Still, a few die-hard traditionalists show up, clinging to the belief that Roman law and imperial authority still mean something. As you observe this hollow pageantry, you're struck by how thoroughly the empire has been hollowed out from within. The forms persist, the titles, the ceremonies, the official documents, but the substance has evaporated like morning dew. It's a masterclass in institutional decay, where the appearance of power continues long after the reality has departed. The young emperor's handlers are already making plans for the day ahead. A brief appearance at the morning sacrifice, a symbolic review of the guard, and perhaps a short session with his tutors. It's the schedule of someone playing emperor rather than being one, and everyone involved seems to understand the performance for what it is, a final act in a very long, very complicated play. You step out of the palace complex and into the streets of Rome, where the morning bustle reveals a city caught between its glorious past and its uncertain future. The Via Appia, once the proud highway that connected Rome to the furthest reaches of its empire, resembles a giant's broken teeth. Magnificent paving stones, cracked and shifted, with weeds growing through the gaps like nature's own political commentary. The first thing that strikes you is the smell. Roman sewers were once the envy of the ancient world, but decades of deferred maintenance have turned the cloaca maxima into more of a suggestion than a functioning drainage system. The distinctive aroma of urban decay mingles with the sense of cooking food, leather workshops, and the ever-present incense from the numerous Christian churches that have sprouted like mushrooms throughout the city. As you navigate the narrow streets, you can't help but notice how the crowds have changed. The cosmopolitan mix that once defined Rome's senators from Gaul, merchants from Egypt, soldiers from Germania, philosophers from Greece, has given way to a more homogeneous population of locals and Germanic settlers. The latter are easy to spot. They're the ones who actually look well-fed and confident, while the Romans themselves seem to move through their own city like uncertain guests at a party that's gone on too long. The city's infrastructure tells the story of imperial decline in vivid detail. Aqueducts that once carried fresh water from mountain springs now deliver a trickle of questionable quality. Public baths, those great democratic institutions where rich and poor once mingled, have been closed or converted to other uses. The famous Roman roads, which once boasted that you could travel from the Forum to the frontiers without leaving paved surfaces, now require the kind of navigational skills usually associated with wilderness expeditions. You pause at a street corner where a group of citizens has gathered around a public notice board. The announcements posted there reveal the empire's new reality: tax increases, grain shortages, changes in currency, and the increasingly common sight of official documents written in both Latin and Germanic languages. One notice, written in the flowery bureaucratic style that Romans perfected, announces that certain civic services will be temporarily suspended pending resolution of current administrative challenges, which is government speak for we're broke and don't know what we're doing. The morning market provides a fascinating study in economic transformation. Merchants still hawk their wares, but the goods reflect the empire's shrinking horizons. Instead of silk from China or spices from India, you find local pottery, wool from nearby farms, and the kind of basic necessities that suggest an economy reverting to more primitive patterns. The coins being used are a numismatist's nightmare: Roman denarii, mixed with barbarian imitations, local tokens, and the occasional piece of silver that's been clipped so many times it's barely recognizable. Historians still argue whether Rome's economic decline was a cause or consequence of its political collapse. But watching merchants struggle to make change with debased currency suggests the answer might be both. The purchasing power of Roman money has become as reliable as a weather forecast, and smart shoppers have started bartering goods directly rather than trusting in imperial coinage. The city's famous 7 hills provide a topographical tour of imperial decay. The Palatine, with its imperial palaces, still maintains some grandeur. The though you can see weeds growing from the rooftops and broken windows that no one bothers to repair. The Capitoline Hill, once the sacred heart of Roman religion, now hosts as many Christian churches as pagan temples. The Aventine, traditionally the plebeian district, has become a maze of abandoned buildings and squatter settlements. Street-level interactions reveal how Romans are adapting to their new reality. Conversations mix Latin with Germanic words, reflecting the linguistic evolution that's taking place in real time. Children play games that incorporate both Roman and barbarian traditions, creating hybrid cultural forms that will eventually become something entirely new. It's like watching civilization's metamorphosis, except no one's sure what the butterfly will look like. The most poignant sight is the way Romans still perform their daily rituals with a kind of desperate normalcy. They still visit the temples, still conduct business in the forum, still gather at public fountains to exchange gossip and news. It's as if maintaining these routines might somehow preserve the empire through sheer force of habit, like a magical incantation that keeps the world from changing. As you walk these streets that have witnessed more history than any other urban space on Earth, you're struck by the resilience of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. They're not heroes or villains, just regular folks trying to get by while their world transforms around them, probably wondering if tomorrow will bring improvement or just more of the same steady dissolution. You make your way to the Forum Romanum, the beating heart of Roman civilization for over 1,000 years, though these days its pulse is more like a death rattle. The morning sun illuminates the marble columns and bronze statues that once witnessed the speeches of Cicero, the triumphs of Caesar, and the debates that shaped the ancient world. Now they're about to witness something far less inspiring, the Roman Senate's last hurrah. The Curia Julia, the Senate House, still maintains its imposing facade, but as you approach, you notice the subtle signs of decline. The marble steps are cracked, the bronze doors need polishing, and the guards at the entrance look more like they're preventing people from leaving than protecting against intruders. It's architecture pretending to be powerful, like a theater set that's been left standing after the play has ended. Inside, the Senate chamber presents a scene that would be tragic if it weren't so absurd. The famous semicircular benches that once seated 600 of Rome's most powerful men now hold perhaps 60 senators, and half of those are asleep or clearly wishing they were somewhere else. The remainder are mostly elderly Romans clinging to tradition, and a handful of Germanic nobles who have been granted senatorial rank as part of various political arrangements, because nothing says Roman dignity like barbarian chiefs wearing togas. Morning's agenda is a masterpiece of irrelevance. First up, a lengthy debate about the proper procedures for sacrificing to Jupiter, a god most Romans have stopped worshipping. Next, a discussion of tax collection methods for provinces that no longer send taxes. Finally, and this is where it gets really entertaining, a formal vote on whether to send a strongly worded letter to the emperor about the barbarian presence in Rome, as if Romulus Augustulus has any power to do anything about it. historians still argue whether the Senate's continued existence at this point represents Roman resilience or just institutional inertia. But watching these old men debate the finer points of religious law, while Germanic warriors patrol the streets outside, suggests the latter. It's like watching a book club continue meeting after the library has burned down, except the book club thinks it's running the world. The real entertainment comes from the speeches. Senator Marcus Flavius, who must be pushing 80, delivers a passionate oration about the need to maintain Roman traditions, complete with references to ancestors who conquered continents and built aqueducts. His speech is technically impressive, proper Latin syntax, classical rhetorical flourishes, historical allusions that would make Cicero proud. But it's being delivered to an audience that includes Germanic chiefs, who probably think Cicero was a type of pasta. The language dynamics in the chamber are fascinating. Official proceedings are conducted in Latin, but you can hear Germanic, Gothic, and various other languages being spoken during breaks. It's like watching the birth of medieval Europe in real time, as different cultures blend and clash in the same space. The formal votes are announced in Latin, but the real negotiations happen in whispered conversations, using whatever language the participants share. One senator, clearly frustrated with the proceedings, stands up and delivers what amounts to a eulogy for the empire. He speaks of Rome's great achievements, the roads, the laws, the peace that once stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia, and then looks around the nearly empty chamber and asks, "What are we now?" It's a question that hangs in the air like incense, heavy with implications that no one wants to address directly. Most surreal moment comes when a messenger arrives with news from the provinces. The Senate receives reports that various regions have declared independence, that tax revenues have essentially stopped, and that several Germanic kings are carving up former Roman territories among themselves. The senators listen to these reports with the same formal attention they once gave to news of military victories, then proceed to debate whether the proper response is a letter of protest or a formal delegation. The bureaucratic machinery of the Senate continues to function even as its relevance evaporates. Clerks still take minutes, documents are still sealed with official wax, and votes are still recorded in the ancient manner. It's a testament to the power of institutional habit. People continue performing their roles, even when those roles have become purely ceremonial. As the morning session drags on, you notice that the real business of governance is happening outside the chamber. Germanic officials confer with Roman administrators. Christian bishops wield more influence than senators, and local strongmen make decisions that affect people's daily lives. The Senate has become a historical curiosity, a living museum of Roman political tradition that no longer connects to actual power. The session ends with a formal prayer to the gods for the empire's continued prosperity, delivered by a priest who knows that half his audience worships a different god entirely. It's a fitting conclusion to a political institution that's still performing its ancient rituals, while the world around it transforms beyond recognition. You step out of the Senate House and almost immediately encounter the new reality of Roman life. The barbarians aren't at the gates anymore. They're running the neighborhood watch. A group of Germanic warriors, their long hair braided with silver ornaments and their chainmail gleaming in the morning sun, are conducting what looks like a patrol of the Forum. They're not invaders or conquerors in the traditional sense. They're more like new management. And honestly, they seem to be doing a better job than the previous administration. The leader of this group, a tall Goth named Theodoric, not the famous king, just a guy with a popular name, nods politely as you pass. He's learned enough Latin to conduct basic business, though his accent makes him sound like he's chewing on the words before spitting them out. What's remarkable is how normal this interaction feels 6 months ago. Seeing armed Germanic warriors in the Forum would have caused panic. Now, it's just Tuesday morning. The transformation is visible everywhere you look. Germanic families have moved into abandoned Roman villas, not as invaders, but as the new property managers. Their children play in Roman courtyards, learning Latin from Roman tutors, while their parents conduct business in Gothic or Vandal. It's cultural fusion happening in real time, like watching ingredients slowly blend into a new recipe, except the recipe is civilization itself. You overhear a conversation between a Roman merchant and a Germanic chief about trade routes. The Roman is explaining how to navigate the bureaucracy of imperial commerce, while the German is sharing intelligence about which roads are safe from bandits. They're both speaking a hybrid language that's part Latin, part Germanic, and part hand gestures, the birth of what historians will later call the barbarian kingdoms, though the people living through it just call it figuring out how to get things done. The most fascinating aspect is how these Germanic groups have embraced Roman symbols of authority while maintaining their own cultural identity. You see Gothic nobles wearing Roman togas over their traditional clothing, creating a fashion statement that's both familiar and alien. They've adopted Roman titles and administrative practices, but they're running them according to their own cultural values. It's like watching someone use a Roman recipe, but substitute all the ingredients with things from their own pantry. Historians still argue whether this represents the barbarization of Rome or the Romanization of barbarians. But observing these daily interactions suggests the answer is more complicated than either alternative. What you're witnessing is the birth of a new European culture that's neither purely Roman nor purely Germanic, but something entirely new, a hybrid that will eventually become the foundation of medieval civilization. The military situation provides the clearest example of this transformation. The remaining Roman army units are now largely composed of Germanic soldiers serving under Germanic commanders, but they still use Roman tactics, Roman equipment, and Roman administrative systems. It's like watching a band where all the musicians have changed, but they're still playing the same songs, except with their own interpretation and style. You encounter a group of Vandal merchants setting up shop in what used to be a Roman marketplace. They're selling goods that blend Roman craftsmanship with Germanic design sensibilities, pottery that's both functional and decorative, jewelry that combines Roman techniques with barbarian aesthetics, weapons that are engineered like Roman gladii, but decorated with Germanic motifs. It's material culture evolving in real time, creating artifacts that will puzzle archaeologists for centuries. Religious dynamics are equally complex. Many of these Germanic groups are Christians, but they practice Arian Christianity, which differs from the Roman Catholic version in ways that create endless theological debates. You witness a fascinating argument between a Roman priest and a Gothic bishop about the nature of Christ's divinity, conducted in broken Latin, with lots of gesturing and occasional references to Germanic religious traditions. It's like watching theology become a contact sport. The children provide the most hopeful glimpse of this cultural fusion. Germanic kids are learning Latin and Roman history, while Roman children are picking up Germanic languages and customs. They play games that combine elements from both cultures, creating new traditions that their parents don't quite understand, but tolerate because, honestly, the kids seem happier than the adults. These children are the future of post-Roman Europe, and they're writing that future in the dirt of Roman playgrounds. What strikes you most is how practical these arrangements have become. The Germanic groups provide military security and administrative efficiency, while the Romans contribute legal expertise and institutional knowledge. It's not conquest in the traditional sense. It's more like a hostile takeover that's turned into a successful merger, complete with the awkward integration meetings and cultural sensitivity training. The economic partnerships are particularly interesting. Germanic nobles are investing in Roman infrastructure projects, while Roman merchants are learning Germanic trade languages to expand their business networks. It's capitalism with a barbarian twist, proving that the profit motive transcends cultural boundaries. You wander into the Subura, Rome's bustling commercial district, though bustling might be generous given the current state of imperial commerce. The morning market is a fascinating study in economic adaptation. Vendors hawking their wares with the same enthusiasm their ancestors showed during the empire's golden age. But the goods themselves tell a different story. Instead of exotic spices from India or silk from China, you find local pottery, simple woolen clothing, and the kind of basic necessities that suggest an economy reverting to more primitive patterns. The currency situation is a numismatist's nightmare. Roman denarii circulate alongside barbarous imitations, local tokens, and chunks of silver that have been clipped so many times they're barely recognizable. One merchant shows you a handful of coins that represent at least 6 different authorities: official Roman mints, Germanic kingdoms, local strongmen, and what appears to be someone's creative interpretation of what money should look like. It's like trying to make change in a world where everyone has their own idea of what constitutes legal tender. The most revealing conversation happens between 2 grain merchants discussing supply chains. The old Roman system of importing wheat from Egypt has essentially collapsed, leaving local farmers to feed the city's million-plus residents. One merchant explains that he's had to develop relationships Germanic tribes who control the routes to northern grain-producing regions, while the other has started investing in urban agriculture projects, basically turning abandoned Roman villas into farms. It's supply chain management with a post-apocalyptic twist. You observe a fascinating negotiation between a Roman wine merchant and a Gothic chieftain. The Roman is trying to sell amphorae of wine using traditional Roman sales techniques, appeals to quality, references to prestigious vineyards, comparisons to famous vintage years. The Goth, meanwhile, is primarily interested in volume and alcohol content, treating wine as a commodity rather than a luxury item. They eventually reach an agreement that satisfies both parties, but it's clear they're operating from completely different economic paradigms. The marketplace also reveals how professional skills are adapting to new circumstances. Roman craftsmen are learning Germanic techniques, while barbarian artisans are incorporating Roman methods into their work. You see pottery that combines Roman wheel throwing with Germanic decorative traditions, metalwork that uses Roman techniques to create Germanic designs, and textiles that blend Roman weaving methods with barbarian patterns. It's like watching the birth of medieval European craftsmanship in real time. Historians still argue whether Rome's economic decline was a cause or consequence of its political collapse. But watching merchants struggle with debased currency and unreliable supply chains suggests the two were closely linked. The famous Roman roads, once the arteries of imperial commerce, now require armed escorts and local guides. What was once a unified economic system has fragmented into a collection of regional markets, each with its own rules, currencies, and cultural expectations. The banking situation is particularly interesting. Roman financial institutions, once sophisticated enough to handle transactions across 3 continents, have largely given way to simpler arrangements. You witness a transaction where a Germanic merchant deposits goods with a Roman banker, but instead of receiving a written receipt, they perform a ritual involving witnesses and symbolic objects. It's finance reverting to more personal, relationship-based systems. The most poignant moment comes when you encounter an elderly Roman merchant who's been trading in the same spot for 40 years. He shows you a collection of coins from his early career, beautiful silver pieces bearing the images of powerful emperors, minted when Roman currency was accepted from Britain to Mesopotamia. Now, he's dealing with crude local imitations and barter transactions. The money tells the story, he says, holding up a badly clipped denarius. When the currency dies, the empire dies. The service economy reveals similar patterns of adaptation. Roman lawyers are learning Germanic legal traditions, while barbarian judges are incorporating elements of Roman law into their decisions. Public bath attendants have become building maintenance specialists. Gladiator trainers have transitioned to private security work, and imperial bureaucrats have reinvented themselves as freelance administrators. It's like watching an entire civilization's LinkedIn profiles getting updated simultaneously. Food vendors provide a culinary tour of cultural fusion. Roman recipes are being adapted use locally available ingredients, while Germanic cooking methods are being applied to Roman dishes. You sample what the vendor calls barbarian bread, a Germanic recipe made with Roman wheat, and it's actually quite good. The flavor profile is different from traditional Roman bread, but it's filling and nutritious, which matters more than culinary tradition when you're not sure where your next meal is coming from. The morning market concludes with a scene that perfectly captures the economic transition. A Roman senator, still wearing his traditional toga, is bargaining with a Germanic merchant for basic household goods. The senator is offering payment in land grants and administrative favors, while the merchant wants silver and grain. They're essentially negotiating between two different economic systems, one based on political authority and legal abstractions, the other on tangible goods and personal relationships. The fact that they eventually reach an agreement suggests that human commerce will survive even when empires don't. You make your way to the campus Martius, the traditional training ground of Roman legions, though what you find there would make Caesar weep into his laurel wreath. The morning drill session is conducted in a mixture of Latin and Germanic languages, with commands being translated on the fly as soldiers who have never seen the Mediterranean try to master formations perfected by men who conquered the world. The unit you're observing is technically still called a legion, but it's more like a multicultural experiment in military organization. The centurion is a Goth who learned his trade fighting against Romans. The standard bearer is a Vandal who can barely read Latin, and the regular soldiers represent a united nations of barbarian tribes. They're wearing a mixture of Roman armor and Germanic equipment, creating a visual that's both familiar and alien, like watching a Roman military manual being performed by a barbarian theater troupe. The most striking change is in military culture itself. Traditional Roman discipline, based on strict hierarchy and unquestioning obedience, has given way to a more consultative approach that reflects Germanic military traditions. Before executing a particularly complex maneuver, the centurion calls a brief council with his subordinates, explaining the rationale and asking for input. It's military democracy in action, and while it would horrify traditional Roman commanders, it seems to work for these soldiers. You witness a training exercise that perfectly illustrates this cultural fusion. The troops are practicing the famous Roman testudo, or tortoise formation, but they're adapting it to incorporate Germanic fighting techniques. The result is something that's recognizably Roman, but functionally different, a hybrid military tactic that combines the best of both traditions. It's like watching evolutionary biology in action, except the species being modified is military doctrine. The equipment tells its own story of imperial transformation. Roman gladii are mixed with Germanic spatha, scutum shields alongside barbarian round shields, and Roman larica segmentata armor worn with Germanic chainmail. The result is a military force that looks like it's been assembled from a historical costume party, but the soldiers themselves seem comfortable with the mixture. They're pragmatists who care more about effectiveness than tradition. Historians still argue whether these foederati, allied barbarian troops serving under Roman command, represent the evolution of Roman military practice or its complete abandonment. But watching them train suggests the distinction might be meaningless. They're using Roman tactics and equipment, serving Roman strategic objectives, and being paid by Roman authorities. The fact that they're not ethnically Roman seems less important than their functional role in maintaining imperial security. The language situation in the military is particularly fascinating. Official communications are still conducted in Latin, but practical conversations happen in whatever language the participants share. You overhear a Germanic sergeant explaining Roman siege tactics to his troops in Gothic, while a Roman engineer describes fortification techniques using a mixture of Latin and Germanic technical terms. It's like watching the birth of medieval European military culture, where effectiveness trumps linguistic purity. The most revealing moment comes during a discussion of military pay. These soldiers are being compensated not just with traditional Roman wages, but with land grants, property rights, and what amounts to immigration papers for their families. They're not mercenaries in the traditional sense. They're becoming Romans through military service, participating in a transformation that's changing the definition of Roman citizenship itself. The training exercises reveal how military tactics are adapting to new realities. Classical Roman warfare assumed professional legions fighting other organized armies. But these soldiers are being trained for a different kind of conflict, dealing with bandits, protecting trade routes, and maintaining order in regions where central authority has essentially collapsed. It's counterinsurgency warfare before the term existed, and it requires different skills than traditional Roman military doctrine emphasized. You observe a particularly interesting interaction between a Roman military engineer and a Germanic warlord. The Roman is explaining how to construct proper Roman fortifications, while the German is sharing intelligence about local terrain and enemy tactics. They're both contributing essential knowledge to the military effort, but they're coming from completely different cultural and tactical backgrounds. The result is a fortification that's technically Roman, but adapted to local conditions and threats. The morning concludes with what passes for a military parade. The troops march in formation, carrying standards that bear both Roman eagles and Germanic totems. The effect is visually striking, a display of military power that's clearly descended from Roman traditions, but has been adapted for new circumstances. It's like watching history in transition, where the old forms persist, but the content has been completely transformed. The officer's briefing that follows reveals the strategic challenges facing this hybrid military force. They're responsible for maintaining order in regions where Roman law is increasingly theoretical, protecting trade routes that connect Germanic kingdoms with Roman cities, and serving as a bridge between different cultural groups that need to coexist. It's a military role that's part soldier, part diplomat, part cultural translator, a far cry from the straightforward conquest missions that defined traditional Roman warfare. You walk through the religious district of Rome, where the morning reveals a spiritual landscape as fragmented as the empire itself. The ancient temples still stand, their marble columns and bronze statues reaching toward the sky, but they're competing for attention with Christian churches, Germanic shrines, and the kind of religious syncretism that happens when different cultures try to figure out whose gods are in charge. The temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, once the spiritual heart of Roman power, now receives visitors who seem more interested in its historical significance than its religious function. The morning sacrifice is conducted by an elderly priest who's probably one of the last people in Rome who actually believes Jupiter is paying attention to Roman politics. The handful of worshippers present are mostly old-timers clinging to tradition, plus a few Germanic nobles who have been told that honoring Roman gods is good for diplomatic relations. Most fascinating religious development is the theological debates taking place in Christian churches. You witness a heated argument between Roman Catholic and Arian Christian theologians about the nature of Christ's divinity. The Roman position, supported by recent church councils, maintains that Christ is fully divine and equal to God the Father. The Arian position, popular among many Germanic groups, argues that Christ is subordinate to the Father. It's a theological dispute that's become a political issue, since many of Rome's new barbarian allies are Arian Christians. The debate is conducted in Latin, but both sides occasionally lapse into their native languages when they get particularly passionate. The Roman theologian quotes extensively from Greek church fathers, while the Arian bishop references Germanic translations of Scripture. It's like watching a boxing match where the fighters are using different rulebooks, and the outcome will determine which version of Christianity becomes dominant in post-Roman Europe. The religious landscape also reveals how Roman polytheism is adapting to new circumstances. Many traditional Roman gods are being reinterpreted as Christian saints, allowing people to maintain their spiritual practices while officially converting to Christianity. The goddess Minerva becomes Saint Catherine, Mars transforms into Saint Michael, and local protective deities get baptized as Christian martyrs. It's theological creativity at its finest, proving that religious belief is more adaptable than institutional doctrine. You encounter a particularly interesting shrine that perfectly embodies this religious fusion. It's dedicated to a deity that's part Roman Mercury, part Germanic Wotan, and part Christian Saint Peter, apparently. When you need your messages delivered reliably, you hedge your bets with multiple divine postal services. The shrine's votives include traditional Roman wax tablets, Germanic runic stones, and Christian crosses, creating a spiritual marketplace where different religious traditions compete for the same customers. The morning religious procession provides a visual tour of Rome's spiritual transformation. Christian monks carrying crosses march alongside Germanic priests bearing sacred hammers, while traditional Roman augurs consult bird flights for omens. It's like watching a religious United Nations parade, except everyone's trying to figure out who's actually in charge of the universe. The procession concludes at a church that's been built inside a former Roman temple, with Christian altars sharing space with classical columns and pagan decorative elements. Historians still argue whether this religious syncretism represents the Christianization of Rome or the paganization of Christianity. But watching these daily spiritual practices suggests the answer is more complex than either alternative. What you're witnessing is the birth of medieval European Christianity, which will incorporate elements from Roman, Germanic, and Celtic traditions into a new religious synthesis. The most poignant moment comes when you encounter an elderly Roman priest who's been serving the same temple for 40 years. He shows you the temple's record books, which chronicle the steady decline in offerings, the conversion of worshippers to Christianity, and the increasing difficulty of maintaining traditional religious practices. The gods are not dead, he says quietly, but they're very, very quiet. It's a theological observation that doubles as a political metaphor. Religious dynamics are further complicated by the influence of Germanic shamanic traditions. You observe a healing ritual that combines Roman medical knowledge with Germanic herbal practices and Christian prayer. The practitioner, a Romano-Germanic woman who's learned from multiple traditions, explains that effective healing requires appealing to all available spiritual resources. It's practical theology. When you're sick, you don't care which god provides the cure. You make your way to what remains of Rome's great libraries, where the morning light filters through windows that have seen better days, illuminating shelves that seem to grow emptier with each passing month. The Bibliotheca Palatina, once the repository of human knowledge from across the empire, now feels more like a museum than a living institution. The scholars who still frequent these halls are engaged in what amounts to intellectual triage, deciding which texts are worth preserving and which can be allowed to crumble into dust. The most dedicated of these scholarly refugees is an elderly Greek named Boethius, who's been translating Aristotle's works into Latin with the desperate urgency of someone trying to save a drowning civilization. He explains that with Greek becoming less common in the West, these translations might be the only way future generations will access classical philosophy. It's like watching someone build an ark for ideas, loading it with the intellectual treasures of a civilization that's slowly sinking beneath the waves. The library's morning routine reveals the practical challenges of preserving knowledge during civilizational collapse. Scribes work by candlelight because the windows are too damaged to provide adequate illumination, and parchment has become so expensive that they're reusing old documents, scraping away previous texts to make room for new ones. You witness the creation of what will become known as palimpsests, manuscripts, where traces of earlier texts remain visible beneath newer writing, creating accidental archives of lost knowledge. The most fascinating project is being conducted by a group of Christian scholars who who are attempting to reconcile classical philosophy with Christian theology. They're creating what amounts to a philosophical synthesis that will preserve Greek and Roman intellectual traditions within a Christian framework. It's like watching the birth of medieval scholasticism, except the participants don't know they're creating a new intellectual movement. They think they're just trying to save whatever they can from the wreckage. You observe a heated debate between a traditional Roman educator and a Christian monk about which texts deserve preservation. The Roman argues for saving classical literature, historical works, and philosophical treatises that represent the best of pagan intellectual achievement. The Christian insists that resources should be focused on theological works, biblical commentaries, and texts that will serve the spiritual needs of future generations. It's a triage decision that will determine which aspects of classical civilization survive into the medieval period. The language situation in the library is particularly revealing. Latin is still the official language of scholarship, but you overhear conversations in Greek, Gothic, and various other languages as scholars from different cultural backgrounds share their expertise. A Germanic scholar is working on a translation of Roman legal texts into Gothic, while a Roman historian is collaborating with a Vandal chieftain to record barbarian oral traditions. It's intellectual cooperation across cultural boundaries, proving that the pursuit of knowledge transcends political divisions. Historians still argue whether these late Roman scholars were preserving classical civilization or transforming it beyond recognition, but watching them work suggests the distinction might be meaningless. They're adapting classical knowledge to new circumstances, creating hybrid intellectual forms that will serve different purposes than their original sources. It's cultural evolution in action, where survival requires adaptation rather than preservation. The most ambitious project is being led by a scholar named Cassiodorus, who's attempting to create a comprehensive educational curriculum that will serve the needs of post-Roman society. His program combines classical rhetoric with Christian theology, Roman law with Germanic customs, and Greek philosophy with practical administrative skills. It's like watching someone design a university curriculum for a civilization that doesn't exist yet, but which will need educated administrators, lawyers, and teachers. The morning's work is interrupted by a messenger bringing news that another library has been destroyed, not by barbarian raiders, but by local Christians who considered its pagan texts dangerous to spiritual health. The scholars receive this news with the resignation of people who have been fighting a losing battle for years. One mutters that they're not just preserving books, they're preserving the very idea that knowledge is worth preserving. The physical conditions of the library tell their own story of institutional decline. The roof leaks, the heating system no longer works, and the copying materials are increasingly expensive and difficult to obtain. Yet, the scholars continue their work with the dedication of people who understand they're engaged in a race against time. They're not just copying texts, they're copying civilization itself, trying to ensure that something of Roman intellectual achievement survives into whatever comes next. day's most revealing moment comes when a young Germanic prince arrives seeking education. He wants to learn Latin, Roman law, and classical rhetoric, not because he's interested in Roman culture, but because he recognizes that these skills will be valuable for governing his people. The scholars welcome him enthusiastically, understanding that their knowledge will survive only if it proves useful to the new ruling class. It's intellectual adaptation at its most practical level. You spend your afternoon in the Subura, Rome's working-class neighborhood, where the sounds of daily life, children playing, merchants hawking wares, neighbors gossiping, create a soundtrack that's remarkably similar to what you might have heard during the Empire's Golden Age. The difference is in the details. The conversations mix Latin with Germanic words. The goods for sale reflect local rather than imperial production, and the underlying anxiety about the future permeates every interaction. The neighborhood's demographics tell the story of imperial transformation. Traditional Roman families live alongside Germanic settlers, creating a cultural mixture that's both harmonious and occasionally tense. You witness a fascinating argument between a Roman baker and a Gothic customer about bread recipes. The Roman insists on traditional Roman methods, while the Goth prefers Germanic baking techniques. They eventually compromise on a hybrid recipe that satisfies both palates, but the negotiation reveals how every aspect of daily life has become a cultural battleground. The most revealing conversations happen around the public fountain, where neighbors gather to collect water and exchange information. Today's topics include grain prices, tax collectors, and rumors about political developments. What strikes you is how pragmatic these discussions are. People are less concerned with grand questions about the empire's future than with immediate issues like food security, personal safety, and economic survival. It's like watching democracy in action, except the participants understand that their votes don't matter as much as their ability to adapt. The children's activities provide the most hopeful glimpse of cultural adaptation. Roman kids are learning Germanic languages and customs, while barbarian children are picking up Latin and Roman traditions. They play games that combine elements from both cultures, creating new forms of entertainment that their parents don't quite understand, but tolerate because childhood joy transcends cultural boundaries. These kids are literally playing their way into a new European identity. The economic situation reveals how ordinary people are adapting to imperial decline. Traditional Roman occupations, imperial bureaucrats, legion suppliers, long-distance traders are being replaced by more local alternatives. You meet a former Roman tax collector who's become a freelance accountant, a retired legionnaire who's opened a private security business, and a displaced imperial clerk who's learned Germanic languages to work as a cultural translator. It's career reinvention on a civilizational scale. The housing situation tells its own story of urban transformation. Many traditional Roman apartment buildings are being subdivided to accommodate Germanic families, creating architectural hybrids that combine Roman construction techniques with barbarian living arrangements. You see courtyards that that have been converted into small farms, rooms that have been reconfigured for extended families, and buildings that have been fortified against the increased urban violence that accompanies political instability. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans experienced the empire's fall as catastrophic loss or gradual adaptation, but observing these daily interactions suggests the answer varied by individual circumstances. Some people have clearly suffered, former imperial officials without pensions, displaced military families, merchants whose trade routes have been disrupted. Others seem to be thriving in the new environment, particularly those who have developed skills that are valuable to both Romans and barbarians. The most poignant moment comes when you encounter a group of elderly Romans reminiscing about the good old days when the empire was strong and life was predictable. They speak of a time when Roman citizenship meant something, when the legions could guarantee peace, and when the emperor's word was law throughout the known world. Their nostalgia is genuine, but it's also tinged with the recognition that those days are gone forever. The religious practices of ordinary people reveal how spiritual life is adapting to new circumstances. You witness a funeral that combines Roman burial customs with Germanic mourning rituals and Christian prayers. The ceremony is conducted in 3 languages, with different participants contributing elements from their respective traditions. It's a spiritual potluck that somehow creates a meaningful experience for everyone involved, despite the cultural complexity. The evening meal preparation provides a culinary tour of cultural fusion. Roman recipes are being adapted to use locally available ingredients, while Germanic cooking methods are being applied to Roman dishes. Family dinners have become experiments in international cuisine, with traditional Roman dishes sharing table space with barbarian specialties. The children seem to prefer the hybrid dishes, while their parents cling to traditional recipes, with the determination of people trying to preserve their cultural identity, one meal at a time. The day's most revealing conversation happens between 2 neighbors, a Roman widow and a Germanic merchant, who have become friends despite their different backgrounds. They discuss their hopes for their children, their concerns about the future, and their strategies for surviving in uncertain times. What emerges is a picture of ordinary people focusing on human connections rather than cultural differences, finding common ground in their shared desire for safety, prosperity, and happiness. As midnight approaches, you find yourself alone on the Palatine Hill, looking out over the city that once commanded the world. The moon illuminates the 7 hills of Rome, their slopes dotted with the marble monuments and bronze statues that proclaimed this city's dominion over 3 continents. From this vantage point, Rome still looks eternal, the architectural legacy of 1,000 years of conquest and construction, creating a skyline that seems to mock the very concept of decline. The irony is almost overwhelming. You're standing in the same spot where Augustus once gazed out over his empire, where Trajan planned his conquests, where Marcus Aurelius wrote his philosophical meditations. They all believed they were building something permanent, something that would last forever. The poets called it the eternal city, and honestly, that confidence was probably justified when Roman legions were marching from Britain to Mesopotamia, when Roman law governed hundreds of millions of people, and when Roman engineering was creating infrastructure that would outlast the empire itself. But empires, like people, have a way of aging when you're not paying attention. What started as a few wrinkles around the edges, some barbarian raids here, a rebellious province there, became full-blown institutional collapse. The process was so gradual that people living through it probably didn't realize they were witnessing the end of the world as they knew it. It's like watching a sunset in slow motion, where each moment seems normal until you realize darkness has fallen. The city below tells the story of imperial transformation in physical form. The Colosseum, that great symbol of Roman power and entertainment, now hosts Christian services more often than gladiatorial games. The Forum, where senators once debated the fate of nations, has become a marketplace where Germanic merchants sell goods to Roman customers. The Circus Maximus, which once held 250,000 spectators watching chariot races, now serves as a giant housing development for the city's growing population of barbarian settlers. Historians still argue whether Rome fell or simply transformed, but from this midnight perspective, the distinction seems less important than the continuity. The city still exists, people still live here, commerce still flows through its streets, and children still play in its courtyards. The forms have changed: Germanic kings instead of Roman emperors, Christian churches instead of pagan temples, local militias instead of professional legions. But the essential function of urban civilization continues. The most striking realization is how thoroughly the empire has been hollowed out from within. The institutional structures persist, the Senate still meets, the bureaucracy still functions, the legal system still operates, but the substance has been transformed beyond recognition. It's like watching a tree that looks healthy from the outside, but has been completely consumed by termites. The bark remains intact, but the wood has been replaced by something else entirely. The human cost of this transformation is harder to quantify, but no less real. Families have been displaced, careers have been destroyed, and entire ways of life have vanished. The cultural confidence that once defined Roman identity has given way to uncertainty about the future. People who grew up believing they were citizens of the greatest empire in history now wake up wondering what they are and where they belong. Yet there's something inspiring about the resilience of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. They're not heroes or villains, just regular folks trying to get by while their world transforms around them. They're adapting, innovating, and creating new forms of social organization that will eventually become the foundation of medieval European civilization. It's human adaptability at its most impressive, proving that people can survive almost anything if they're willing to change. The architectural legacy spread out below represents more than just buildings. It's a physical manifestation of human ambition, creativity, and the desire to create something lasting. The aqueducts still carry water, the roads still connect distant places, and the buildings still provide shelter. Roman engineering was so good that it will outlast the empire that created it, serving the needs of whatever civilization comes next. Most profound realization is how this moment fits into the larger sweep of human history. Rome's fall isn't the end of civilization. It's a transition between different forms of social organization. The knowledge, skills, and cultural innovations that made Rome great won't disappear. They'll be absorbed, adapted, and transformed by the people who inherit this world. It's cultural evolution in action, where survival requires adaptation rather than preservation. As the first light of dawn breaks over the eternal city, you realize you're witnessing something unprecedented in human history. The peaceful transition from one form of civilization to another. The sun rises over Rome as it has for thousands of years, but the world it illuminates has been fundamentally transformed. The empire that once stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia now exists primarily in memory, replaced by a collection of barbarian kingdoms, Christian churches, and local strongmen who have learned to govern using Roman techniques. The morning reveals the full scope of this transformation. In the streets below, Germanic warriors patrol routes once walked by Roman legions. In the churches, Christian priests conduct services in buildings that once housed pagan gods. In the marketplaces, barbarian merchants conduct business using Roman commercial law. In the schools, Germanic nobles learn Latin rhetoric alongside Roman students. It's not conquest in the traditional sense. It's more like cultural osmosis, where different traditions blend and merge to create something entirely new. The most remarkable aspect of this transition is how peaceful it's been. There are no burning buildings, no massacres, no dramatic scenes of destruction. Instead, there's been a gradual shifting of power, a slow transformation of institutions, and a careful negotiation between different cultural groups about how to share the same space. It's like watching a river change course, dramatic in its long-term effects, but surprisingly gentle in its immediate impact. The children playing in Roman courtyards represent the future of this new world. They're learning languages that combine Latin and Germanic elements, practicing customs that blend Roman and barbarian traditions, and developing identities that transcend the cultural boundaries that divide their parents. These kids are literally growing up European, though they don't know it yet. They're the first generation of what will become medieval European civilization. The institutional continuity is equally remarkable. Roman law continues to influence legal decisions, even when those decisions are made by Germanic judges. Roman administrative techniques continue to guide government operations, even when those operations are conducted by barbarian officials. Roman educational methods continue to shape intellectual development, even when the students are learning Gothic and Vandal alongside Latin. It's institutional evolution rather than institutional death. Religious transformation provides the clearest example of this cultural synthesis. Christianity, which began as a Jewish sect, became a Roman religion and is now becoming a barbarian faith. The churches that dot the Roman landscape serve congregations that include Romans, Goths, Vandals, and various other groups, all worshiping the same God in slightly different ways. It's theological unity emerging from cultural diversity, creating a spiritual foundation for the new European civilization. The economic networks tell a similar story of adaptation and continuity. Trade routes that once connected Roman provinces now link barbarian kingdoms. Commercial relationships that once depended on imperial guarantees now rely on personal trust and local agreements. Markets that once served Roman customers now cater to Germanic tastes. It's capitalism adapting to new political realities, proving that the desire for profit transcends cultural boundaries. The most inspiring realization is how this transformation demonstrates human adaptability. People who were raised as Romans are learning to live as something else. People who were raised as barbarians are learning to function in civilized society. People who were raised as pagans are converting to Christianity. People who were raised speaking one language are learning to communicate in another. It's cultural flexibility on a massive scale, showing that human identity is more fluid than most people imagine. As the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the Roman Forum, you understand that you're not witnessing the end of civilization, you're witnessing its transformation. The knowledge, skills, and cultural innovations that made Rome great won't disappear. They'll be absorbed, adapted, and transformed by the people who inherit this world. Latin will evolve into the Romance languages. Roman law will influence European legal systems, and Roman architectural techniques will inspire medieval builders. The empire that once boasted it would last forever has indeed achieved a kind of immortality, though not in the way its founders imagined. Instead of lasting as a political entity, it will live on as a cultural influence, shaping the development of European civilization for centuries to come. The barbarians who conquered Rome have themselves been conquered by Roman ideas, Roman methods, and Roman dreams of order and prosperity. And so, as this long day draws to close, you find yourself changed by what you've witnessed. The fall of Rome wasn't the dramatic collapse that historians sometimes describe. It was more like a slow-motion metamorphosis, where one form of civilization gradually transformed into another. The people you've met today, the powerless emperor, the adaptive senators, the practical barbarians, the resilient merchants, the dedicated scholars, and the hopeful children, they're all part of this great transformation. The city settles into evening quiet, its ancient stones holding the memories of 1,000 years of human ambition and achievement. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight, Rome rests peacefully under the same stars that once witnessed its greatest triumphs. The empire may be ending, but the story of human civilization continues, written in new languages by new peoples who have learned to dream Roman dreams. Let the gentle sounds of the eternal city lull you to sleep now. The fountains still flow with water from distant mountains. The wind still whispers through marble columns, and the night still wraps around the 7 hills like a familiar embrace. In your dreams, you might hear the echo of ancient footsteps on Roman roads, the distant sound of Germanic laughter mixing with Latin conversation, and the soft prayers of people finding new ways to hope for tomorrow. The fall of Rome was not an ending, it was a beginning. Sleep well, knowing that even when empires end, the human story continues, written by people who refuse to let civilization die, who adapt and endure and find ways to build something new from the ashes of what came before. The sun will rise again on a world that's different but not diminished, changed but not broken, Roman in memory but European in dreams. Sweet dreams, and remember you've witnessed the birth of a new world.